You're about to go vote on a judicial nominee, Emil Bove, who was Donald Trump's personal defense attorney, who literally hundreds of DOJ people have come out and said, this guy is terrible. There have been multiple whistleblowers who basically said he instructed them to ignore court orders. And I want to ask you this question. Is this the worst judicial nominee you've ever had to vote on in your career?
Yes, I believe it is. This will be a corruption of the judicial system, Chris. This is a guy who wants to be a judge, who ordered Department of Justice lawyers to lie to judges. So when you have somebody who wants to be a judge, who helps to fire people because they won't lie to a judge, you have a corruption of our justice system. It is a terrible nomination.
It's Ken Harbaugh with the Midas Touch Network. The United States Senate just confirmed Emil Bove to a lifetime appointment on the Third Circuit Federal Court of Appeals. That's one step below the Supreme Court and one of the most important appeals courts in terms of the cases it hears. And as expected, not a single Democrat voted to confirm. It's one thing to have an official whose colleagues and staff members don't like them or get along with them. That's not what's going on here. While there's probably some personal animus behind the accusations against Mr. Bove because he sounds like a horrible person to work with, the whistleblower complaints are specific. They're not personal. They're about the rule of law, judicial integrity, and separation of powers. For every warning you've heard on this network about the Trump regime setting up a confrontation with the judicial branch, this is the flashing red light. One of those whistleblower complaints from a highly credible source recounts how Emil Bove said he would disobey court orders to advance Trump's deportation agenda. The Trump regime is setting the stage intentionally for a constitutional crisis. I spoke with National Security Attorney Mark Zaid about this. In part one of our conversation posted earlier this week, Mark talked about appearing on the Trump regime's list of named enemies alongside Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. In part two, Mark and I discussed the ultimate red line moment for our democracy, the neutering of our courts, either through open defiance by the executive of the judiciary or through the installation of partisan loyalists like Emil Bove. Mark and I differ on just how close we are to that threshold moment, but we both agree that crossing it would be the end of American democracy as we know it. Here's part two of my conversation with Mark Zaid. I'm conflicted about the position of the court right now because I am dreading the day when that defiance is out in the open, but the court seems to be giving the executive so much leash right now up until that point. I mean, they've granted the president immunity for official acts, including ordering the assassination potentially of a political opponent. How have your feelings about the Supreme Court changed given these recent tests?
I mean, the reality is these decisions come down to three justices, of whom those three switch back and forth. There have been many decisions which have gone against the administration from the Supreme Court, including as either 8-0 or 9-0 decisions. They tended to have been about due process. Even the decisions where most people are upset about, now putting aside the immunity one, which of course happened before Trump was president, which is a concern regardless of whether it was Trump, just a concern of that the president has that level of immunity, and hopefully that will change at some point in the future. But looking inside this administration, there have been a number of firings of senior officials, and we've seen these emergency applications go into the Supreme Court. That's where Trump has prevailed. And it's generally been to reinstate the terminations pending the substantive litigation of the case. So there hasn't been a substantive decision in many of these cases. It's been a procedural decision to allow the termination to exist while the substantive challenge is pending. And that does have a significant impact, but I'm cautiously optimistic that once the substance gets up to the Supreme Court, that there'll be a sufficient number of justices, both right and left, liberal and conservative, who will say due process is what matters in this country. So I'm litigating any number of these cases, or what we call Article 2 terminations, where the president of the United States has said, I'm the king, you work for me, you're fired, shades of The Apprentice, you're fired, no due process, no reason, doesn't matter why. Same how I've lost my security clearance because he doesn't like what I do as a lawyer. I'm hopeful the Supreme Court will step in and say, that's inappropriate. You need to have substantive reason. By the way, these are laws that Congress passed. This is what makes it so infuriating that Congress is not stepping up to not reclaim, but to assert its authority that it knows it possesses, but now has ceded to the executive branch.
I really want to share your optimism about the courts. The pun intended, the jury is still out for me on that. But even with a court that stands up for the rule of law and pushes back against a co-equal branch of government, this is more of a philosophical question, because it feels like the president doesn't really need a compliant court to intimidate the people he's trying to intimidate. I mean, just the process of having to defend yourself, in your case personally, against charges from the president of the United States, the fact that he can do these things and it takes years for the courts to fix them or to right them. I mean, that's power in and of itself, even if at the end of the day he is ruled against.
There's no doubt about it. The threat, you mentioned it earlier, of polygraphs being used against individuals who had never in their entire career had to experience one because it wasn't a requirement of their job. It's being used as an intimidation tactic. It's being used to ensure that people stay in line, that they're concerned about talking to anyone. There are lots of folks who I'm representing who are still in the government, who are, fearful of being fired. So there is a tendency right now for them not to kind of rock the boat. That's not necessarily a good thing, right? We talk about, when I do a lot of freedom of information litigation, of getting at the deliberative process and why one reason historically documents wouldn't be released that were draft was so that no one would be chilled in how they would participate in discussions, so that they would openly be able to say, no, I disagree with that, as they work out what the official position might be. But if you don't toe the line now on the inside, if you voice an objection or a concern as to a policy, you are often met with either reassignment, some sort of retaliatory action, to include termination. And that, of course, then sends a message to everyone else not to dissent. And that is a problem in the government. What makes democracy so great is the ability of those inside the government to raise opposing viewpoints to help the government come up with what the ultimate policy might be. And we are losing that to this authoritarian or patrimonialistic government, as well as with the removal of all the oversight authorities, the inspector generals, the top leaders, whether they just leave them in positions unfilled and put in acting people, or as Marco Rubio has like 6 jobs right now or something. I think he's still the archivist of the United States, even though this legislation doesn't allow it, and the National Security Advisor and and USAID administrator, Secretary of State. I'm not sure what else. He might be chief dog washer, for all I know as well, although I don't think Trump likes dogs or has a dog. So, that's another story in and of itself. I think this is the first White House where we usually don't have a pet, right?
That's the real tell for me.
Right? Not even a goldfish. But, allowing or creating that chaos in the system, or then putting in, obviously, those who are loyal to the individual rather than the system, just brings us further closer to, what we always learned against in school.
Hey, it's Ken Harbaugh. Quick break to say thank you to everyone who's been following and supporting this show and this channel. None of it happens without you. And if you haven't yet subscribed to my Substack page, I'd really appreciate the follow. It's a great way to make sure you never miss an episode. It's free to sign up. And if you're able to pitch in a few bucks, every dollar goes back into the show Just search for The Ken Harbaugh Show on Substack or click the link below. Thanks. Last question. Do you think the American people care about any of this? I mean, do you think they are paying attention to what is happening to the civil service or what is happening with polygraph tests of loyal Americans in the Department of Defense? Is this something we should even try to get the average voter, because that's the ultimate check and balance? It's the House elections in 26 and the presidential in 28. Is this something we should be communicating?
I mean, I do think so. Look, right? As I said, I'm not a partisan. I'm not out there to advocate for voting. I think people should vote for whatever. But yes, because people should care. That's the issue. The problem, as the Democrats always learn, is that people care mostly about themselves. And some of that's clearly understandable. You want to make sure you have food on your table. You want to make sure you have shelter. You want to make sure your family has proper health care and to take care and not be the subject of crimes. But for the most part, people are not paying attention to what happens to other people. That's a broad generalization, obviously, because there are people from around the world, right? Around the country at least, but even around the world. But right, I get contacted from people all over the United States in urban and rural locations who are not personally impacted by anything that's happening, but they are concerned either for me, for a client, or for the state of the government and what we're talking about. And that's a good thing, because there should be something bigger than just, right, each of us. We should be concerned about where are the homeless going to go in San Francisco, even though I live 3,000 miles away from it. There should be this. So there is a need to educate everyone as to what is happening so that they understand how undermining the rule of law impacts them. And I'll end with saying what I'm always reminded of, and this is the teaching tool, is the famous poem by the pastor at the end of World War II, where he speaks of, they came for the communists and I didn't speak out because I'm not a communist. They came for the socialists. I didn't speak out. I'm not a socialist. They came for the Jews. I didn't speak out. I'm not Jewish. Then they came for me and there was no one left to speak out. That's why everyone on both parties, whatever philosophy, ideology they might have, they should care about what is happening. And, the 25% MAGA cultists who are celebrating all of this chaos and what's going on, right? That is not the direction that this country should be going in. Doesn't mean it should be the 25% or whatever it is that is far to the left. That should be. Clearly, the pendulum has swung too far on both sides, and we need to get it somewhere back into that middle left, middle right ground so that we can all actually enjoy being with one another. You can have a friend who you have a different political view for. You can have a good Thanksgiving dinner while you watch football and argue over some political aspect rather than hate each other. And unfortunately, I don't have the solution to that problem any more than anybody else does. That's going to have to be a community that comes to this realization that we don't like where we've been now.
Well, we're certainly going to keep talking about it here. Mark, would love to check in again with you soon. Stay strong, man. I can't imagine being in the crosshairs like you've been, but you have weathered it admirably and been an inspiration to a lot of us. Thank you.
Much appreciated, Ken. Thank you.